So how to deal with conversations that are difficult with humor, so that somebody comes up and say, when our grandfathers went here. One of my favorite stories was by the Liz Carpenter, who was the first woman to work as a press person for she was working for Lady Bird Johnson. And she wrote a book after her tenure was up with the Johnson administration called Ruffles and Flourishes. And so John Schlesinger Jr., a statesman and writer in his own right, comes up to her after her book is published and does very well and says, "Oh, loved your book, Liz. Who wrote it for you?" Now that's what I think of as very masculine. "Oh, what's the matter, honey? Just kidding. Can't you take a joke?" No sense of humor. "Come on, I'm just kidding. We're all friends here." So, she's, and my first, or a lot of people's, especially a lot of women's first responses is like, "Why are you trying to undermine my accomplishment? I worked so hard on this. This is terrible. Why can't you just be kind?" But what Liz Carpenter said that made her an early heroine of mine, when Arthur Schlesinger says, "Loved your book, Liz. Who wrote it for you?" She says, "Glad you liked it, Arthur. Who read it to you?" And it's like, all right, you want to play? Then let's play. Gloves are off, then gloves are off. But you are not handing me this, 40-pound medicine ball to carry around with this comment. Because most of us get something like that, and then we go home and it's l'esprit de l'escalier, right? We're thinking, I should have said this and I should have said this, and the next time I'm going to say this, and you're writing things down in the middle of the night. But what Liz Carpenter does is come up. But then from the audience, people put their hands up and go, "But what if Arthur Schlesinger Jr. is secretly illiterate?" They start to feel guilty, right? What if he has a kid who's like doing hooked on phonics? What if he has a grandchild who's dyslexic? I mean, no, if we're going to play, we're going to play. So humor, I see humor as in those difficult situations as often being a kind of martial art. You're using the aggression that's coming towards you back at the aggressor. You're not doing it to initiate, but somebody is doing something like that, then it is fair to turn it back out and to mirror it and sort of shine it back out on them.
CJ.
Wow.
Do you have the right script?
I'm sorry. What's the name of this show?
Do we have the right guest?
I think the guest is probably the only right thing on the show today. Welcome back to Uncomfortable Conversations. I'm CJ Grace, co-hosting this segment with Rona McBain. I really am CJ Grace. She really is Rona McBain. And if you're just tuning in, our conversation topic is the power of humor as a therapeutic tool and to help deal with uncomfortable situations of all kinds. Well, we just heard from Gina Barreca on video, but we're excited to actually have her live in the flesh, in the studio. She is a best-selling humorist, author, speaker, and a professor of feminist theory. Now, Gina has been called smart and funny by People magazine, and very, very funny for a woman by Dave Barry. Now, Gina was deemed also a feminist humor maven by Ms. Magazine. And Gina, on top of all this, she has just won the 2026 Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of Applied Humor Therapy, the AATH. Not the AARP, the AATH. So there you go. Gina, welcome. We're so honored to have you on the show today. Congratulations on winning that award. And first of all, I wanted to ask you, you grew up in a Sicilian family in New York. So how did that build your humor skills?
As I believe in the clip that you played earlier, just growing up in Brooklyn and growing up in an Italian family, there was a lot of speaking going on. And women and girls were not particularly well listened to, and that I learned worked both ways. There were conversations that were had in the kitchen among the aunts, and my aunts were like the old ladies, they don't make anymore. They were about 4'2". They all weighed about 650 pounds. They all wore floral print dresses at all times. So if a group of them were gathered together, it looked like there were ottomans scattered around the floor. The only difference was they didn't have buttons on the top of their heads, but otherwise it was like they were on casters. They would move easily through the kitchen. And we would have, especially if it's a holiday weekend, I mean, whether it's Passover, Easter, whatever you're celebrating, it's spring weekend. And they would have the immediate family of 110 come for dinner. And so there was always cooking going on. And the women would laugh among themselves. And they would laugh, I noticed, without having the word feminist was not thrown around in 1962 in my house. And but that the women would laugh differently when they were with the men than when they were with the other women. So the women would go, all right, let's tell Tony, I got the meat at the butcher he doesn't like. I'm going to tell him I got it at the butcher he doesn't like. I got it at the butcher he likes. But I'm going to tell him I got it at the butcher he doesn't like. Let's see what he does. It was like men were a chemistry experiment. These were beloved. They were the brothers and the uncles and the fathers and their sons and the cousins. They were fabulous. They were kings. They were princes. It didn't mean that they didn't make fun of them. So they would go up to Tony, who was sitting like he was, Juan Valdez tasting the coffee, and he was sitting there, and one Aunt Josie would go to Aunt Rose, and she'd say, Tony, we know you have a fine palate, so you could tell, but I didn't get the meat at the place you really like. The kids, it was so busy with everything this week. One was in a play. I had to go to the butcher on the corner. I don't know what you're going to think. And the women are all silent, and they're looking at each other because she got it at the real butcher. She's just telling him she didn't get it at the real butcher. And Tony, a lot of authority, takes a piece and looks up and goes, girls, or however old you were a girl. Girls, it's fine. It's good. It's fine. It's different, but it's fine. And the women are all going, it's different? Oh, Tony, I'm so glad we told you because we knew with your fine palate. Oh, the difference. Nothing. And then it would go to the basement or outside, and they would laugh, and they would laugh and laugh. And it's different from the way women laugh with men. And I still see it with my students. Women laugh with men. They go, and no woman made that noise when she's having a good time. When women laugh, we always like this, and we're wiping mascara, and we're going, don't make me pee in my pants. And it's a very different affect, shall we say, from the fake silver bell tinkling laughter, and when women are starting to slam their hands down on the table and making things shake. So there's lots of things that influence laughter. So I learned that real laughter and fake laughter were different at that Sicilian Brooklyn table. I learned the power of storytelling. I learned that, as Karen Buxman has said, as other people in the field have said, that real humor is not about jokes. It's about found stories. Real comics have always simply listened carefully to what's said and then taken it back and put a frame around it so that you hear it. And that's what makes people laugh, because it's about shared experience. And that's why humor, to go back to interesting sort of chance synchronicities from earlier conversations, in an interesting way, humor can be about forgiveness, because humor allows us to reconcile our emotional books. If you ask someone the funniest story about their childhood, they'll often tell you something terrible that happened to them, because in telling that, in making it into a funny story, it allows us to heal. It allows us to own a moment that was otherwise lost to regret or sadness or loneliness or isolation or a mistake. But if we can tell a story about it, it allows us to comfort ourselves and make it into something else. It's transformative. It's getting your deposit back on life.
So how do you use humor to cope with difficult conversations? And actually, on the subject of uncomfortable conversations, I heard that Oprah got your name wrong the last time you appeared on her show. So tell us about that. How did you deal with that uncomfortable situation?
I would have changed my name. I mean, whatever Oprah calls you is your name. What, are you kidding? That was fine. She's doing like Rebecca Barreca. It's fine. I always thought if I had a daughter, I would name her Barbara.
Rebecca Barreca. It really rolls off the
Barbara
tongue.
Rebecca Barreca. Just so when they say, "Can you spell that?" BARBARBARB. I mean, she would never get a credit card. It would be fun. And but the funny thing, when I was on the last time I was on Oprah, I was on with two women who were referred to themselves as the Rules Girls, who wrote a book on very narrow ways that you were permitted to attract men. And at one point, Oprah sat down because basically I got into an argument that like we were fishwives, and because they when I walked onto the stage, the blonde, who is as blonde as I am, said, "Well, Dr. Barreca," and she made doctor sound like, like I stepped on her gerbil. "Dr. Barreca, how many times have you been married?" And this is, live television. I said, well, it's recorded, but recorded, it was live. And I said, "I've been married twice." And she goes, "Well, we're both on our first marriage." And I said, "Yeah, honey, but I'm on my last." And the audience was immediately with me. So that's somebody who thought she was going to have advantage of what she was trying to make an uncomfortable conversation. But that's where you take hold of the uncomfortable conversation. That's where you say, "Oh, no, oh, no, no, no." That's going back to the martial arts parts. It's like you have to have the next thing ready that you're going to say to counter what somebody thinks. This is where bullying humor can actually be dismantled if you're ready to pay attention to what the person has just said. But that's where you again have to pay constant, even hovering attention to somebody who might be trying to make you uncomfortable, to use their strategy to make sure that you're the one who is actually in control of your responses. So humor is a really useful strategy in terms of getting through life.
So you can use humor both as a weapon, as you've shown, in a martial arts kind of way, but also as a tool to create community. So what would you say is the difference between those two different types of humor?
Great question. The idea of creating community through humor. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about laughing together. The closest the two people can get without touching is laughing together. Because when you can get somebody to really laugh with you, you've made a connection. Even if you're disagreeing with them, you ever really laugh at something that is profoundly different from what your belief system is or your ethics or whatever, but there's something that's funny in it. You laugh at something that somebody who's on the opposite end of the political spectrum says, they've reached you. If you laugh, it means you understand. And that's really scary. And that's where humor can reach places that other forms of rhetoric, other forms of speech don't go. Because you can, the moment somebody recognizes the truth in what you're saying, does that somersault with you, it's like you've got them. Somebody who might not listen to a 3.5 hour argument about something, if you get them to laugh. So I was one of the first women at basically the last Ivy League school to go co-ed, Dartmouth College. And they were not expecting me on that campus when I got there, and I wasn't expecting them. So we were all a little surprised by ourselves as the first girl in my family to go to college or to graduate from high school in a timely fashion, for that matter. And so when I got there, the guys named Skip and Chip and Trace were all going. When all grandfathers went here, there were no women. And for 3 years, I tried to explain, well, gender equity in terms of access to education is blah, blah. Nobody listened. And by my last year, I said, when your grandfathers went here, there were no indoor lights. Things get better. And that they heard and they laughed. And then they were pissed off that they laughed because they didn't want to hear it. And they could screen out the long arguments, but they couldn't screen out the things get better. So that they remembered. So humor is useful in terms of being memorable when making a point, and especially if it's a difficult or politically charged or emotionally charged point.
Well, I can't ask all the questions. I know Rona has at least one. She wants to ask him at least one question here before we go to our next break.
Yes. So Gina, your first comedy bestseller was back in 1990, but you're still writing humor books now. So how would you say humor has changed over the last 40 years? And are there any taboos now that weren't back then?
Well, again, great question. No, humor has always been about facing taboos, and the taboos are pretty much the same. The taboos are everything you're not allowed to mention in polite conversation. And so taboos are money, sex, life, death, health, illness. You're not, I mean, it's everything that counts as a hard conversation. It's about injustice, it's inequity, it's all the stuff you can't say at the table that people hide. It's about secrets, it's about depression, it's about incontinence, it's about bodies. It's about what can and can't be controlled. I wouldn't say it's very different from what it was. There are many things that we, over the last 15 years, has been a wild ride, but it's always been a wild ride. When Mae West was strutting her stuff on vaudeville, she was jailed for writing a play called Sex, and she wrote a play called Sex and produced it and appeared in it, and she knew she was going to be jailed for doing that. Anytime a woman opened her mouth and actually talked about sex as opposed to performing it, she was considered outrageous. I mean, she was just supposed to keep her mouth in use for other reasons, but certainly not to make a point. And I don't think that's very different. I think that the idea of we're going back to ideas of what women are allowed to do or not allowed to do. I think the straitjacket of masculinity is as confining as the straitjacket of femininity, but I think it's tailored differently. And I think that the idea of sexuality on a spectrum has always been the case. There have always been drag shows. Shakespeare is writing characters who were revealed to be male or revealed to be female on stage, and that was because there were single-sex actors during Shakespeare Day, but it didn't mean that the idea of pansexuality wasn't there. Nothing is new. We all think we're so hip and that this is something new. There is nothing new. Nobody's that original. And so humor has been making fun of the same stuff for since the Commedia dell'arte was played in pits, since Aristophanes was writing the frogs.
Well, Gina, our co-hosts Brian and Dimitri do not want to be left out of the fun here, and they're eager to ask you some more questions. So you'll meet them after the next video. So I'm going to pivot here because one of the darkest eras in human history was the Holocaust. Yet even during that terrible time, Jews used humor as a vital coping strategy. And Israeli researcher Chaya Ostrower spoke to 55 survivors of the Nazi ghettos and concentration camps about this particular subject as research for her doctoral thesis. Clinical psychologist and grief expert Dr. Melissa Mork, a close friend of the researcher, explains more. First of all, let me remind you, though, that Uncomfortable Conversations is powered by Biz in Your Box, described as the first of its kind Prime membership for thriving entrepreneurs and small to mid-sized business owners, providing coaching, connections, and a culture to help you grow your business. If you'd like to learn more, visit our website, thrivingwomennetwork.com, and subscribe to the TWN magazine.
So she asked each of them one question, just one question. Tell me a time when you saw or used humor during the Holocaust in the ghettos, concentration camps, or death camps. And the study itself is incredibly moving. When she was telling me about her findings, I found myself laughing out loud and then weeping at the resilience that was shown through humor and laughter. There was scatological humor, which is toilet humor. There was self-deprecating humor. There was dark humor, gallows humor, food humor. And so she cataloged all of these different categories of humor that was being used. But the meta view, the overview of this were kind of the summary comments that some of the participants made. One of the statements was, humor was one of the primary ingredients of mental perseverance. This mental perseverance was a condition for a will to live. Another participant said this was the integral part of our inner mental struggle for our identity, the fact that we could still laugh at things like these. And a third said, look, without humor, we would have all committed suicide. We make fun of everything. What I'm actually saying is that humor helped us remain human, even under the hardest conditions. Viktor Frankl, if you've read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, yay. If you haven't, you should. Every adult should read this book. And he writes, it is well known that humor, more than anything else in the human makeup, can afford us an aloofness, an ability to rise above any situation, even if only for a few seconds. And when he reflected on how men survived the camps, he wrote, humor was another of the soul's weapons in the fight for self-preservation. I'm a psychologist, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention Sigmund Freud. He wrote in one of his essays, Mourning and Melancholia, which, hey, yeah, Leslie says Man's Search for Meaning is an amazing book. I agree. I read it at least once a year. I reference it in my book. I love that book so much. But Sigmund Freud, this article, this essay, Mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, and Melancholia, he writes about the difference between grief and depression. But he writes, humor is not resigned. It is rebellious. It signifies triumph in the face of adverse real circumstances.
Wow. Hey, Gina.
Hiya. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. So you've tuned in to Uncomfortable Conversations. I'm Dimitri Mills, and today's topic is the power of humor. We're continuing our conversation with Gina Barreca. Did I say it right?
Nope. Barreca. That's fine. Close enough.
Let's go. Okay. Best-selling author, women's humorist, internationally renowned speaker, and professor of feminist theory. Welcome back, Gina.
Thanks.
So we just heard the humor can be beneficial even in the darkest places, such as the Holocaust. Can you talk about the therapeutic value of humor?
Yeah, I would love to mention, just following up with some more, there is an amazing film, a documentary, absolutely compelling, by Fern Perlstein called The Last Laugh. And it has comics, I was going to say Mel Gibson. It's a really big mistake. Mel Brooks. Okay. Mel Brooks and other great Jewish comics talking about the idea of using Hitler. I mean, as a comic figure, that the worst thing that you could do to an oppressor, to a fascist, is to make fun of him. Fascists don't have a sense of humor. Fascism is not known for taking itself lightly, right? That's one of the things. Oh, those fascists, they know how to have time. Never been said. But Perlman, especially there are two women who are Holocaust survivors, and they tell their stories about the time in the camps. And one of them says, like, I can't tell. There are no funny stories I have because it was too profoundly traumatic. The loss was overwhelming. And the other woman was talking about the times that they were allowed to put on shows, the song and dances, that they could sing their grief, that they could take moments that were diversions, but that also, again, celebrated their humanity and the parts that couldn't be taken away from them, their selfhood. And that creativity fueled a part of that. And of course, humor is a great demonstration of creativity and humanity. So, okay, so I needed to get Perlstein's out there because it's on, you can rent it anywhere. It's a great movie. So yeah, I mean, humor is about light and darkness. Humor is about illumination. It shines lights into those darkest corners of the things that we don't want to discuss in public. So it's about emotions that people are often too embarrassed to talk about. But what humor allows us to do, as great literature allows us to do, as a lot of creative endeavors allow us to do, many of us are brought up to live in fear of humiliation. somebody's going to find out about this. I did this. Somebody's going to discover this. We're going to live in shame. But what humor allows us to do is transcend the sense of shame or humiliation and turn it into humility. And humility is a grace. And humility is something that you can share with someone. The humble man, the humble woman, those are the people whose company that you want to be in. And those, because there's a generosity to being humble. Because when you're humble, you know that you're not special. You know that your story is everybody's story. So the people who can do humor well, and I've never been a comic. I have a 2-book minimum, not a 2-drink minimum. People really do comedy. I mean, they have to. They come off as bitter, or they come off as frantic, or they come off as angry. But you go in there with a combination of a strength and vulnerability at the same time. You are walking out there, putting yourself on the edge, right? It's stuff on the edge. It's on the line. But on some level, you are trusting your audience to get it, or at least to make the attempt to get it. You are not out there. It's like being a good writer. You are not telling somebody about your emotions. You're provoking their response so they feel the emotion that you're putting across.
Yes.
Great comics, usually they don't laugh at their own work. The audience laughs. A tragic actor, tragic performer, they are not themselves weeping. The audience is weeping, right? So it's not demonstrating those emotions, it's provoking those emotions. And that comes out of a kind of humility. But again, that's grace. That's gracious.
Well said, and I much appreciate it. I'm gonna turn it over to Brian, but I think you and I go to the same hairstylist. I have the light here, then I have the dark hair.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 20 years, though. I don't think you've been doing this long, sweetheart. Yeah.
Fantastic.
This costs a lot of money to do this.
Well, thank you very much. Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, Gina, great to meet you.
I'm getting a ditto. I don't know if it's you or me, or there are two of you, or...
I'm beside myself.
Oh, okay. Very nice.
Now this is what's written. Unusual for a woman, you're happy to publicly admit your age, weight, and dress size.
Yes.
And I suppose that's true.
I really, I don't know whether it's women or men. I have no problem asking people how old they are. I don't have an issue.
I'm not going to tell you my dress size. So I guess there is that. You talk about growing old, and I love this, joyfully and disgracefully.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
Yeah, I don't have an alternative. That's not you. I mean, I'm like,
the gracefulness is right out the window already.
That was never an option. You can't, end up like, Judi Dench if you started out like Joan Rivers on roller skates. I don't think that that's a possibility for me. Although I would love to be, if there's a way to be Judi Dench, I would love to be Judi Dench. And I bet she's a riot in her real life. In fact, her biography, I recently read her biography. She sounds like a piece of work. But yes, I think that, again, to own your own story, to be able to share it, to be able to pass it around, to make other people feel comfortable, to let somebody know that I say it to audiences because women will try to guess each other's age and weight like we're going to win something at a state fair. And men just care if you're over 18. So it's I hope they care if you're over 18. And it's just easier. I mean, talk about difficult conversations, that it is easier to cut to the chase. Life is short, boy. And it is easier to have a real conversation where people can speak honestly, swiftly, make their points, and use time wisely than to spend a lot of time circling things in what is called polite conversation. I think that impolite conversation doesn't have to be nasty. It could just be real. And that those are
Right.
sometimes the hard conversations.
Yeah, the word vulgar gets such a negative connotation to it, but vulgar used to simply mean common.
Right. And I think common still has a negative connotation. And it meant the non-aristocratic. It was the uneducated. And in the days of no education, where the definition of a gentleman, and it was only men, of course, who got, and white men and straight men and Christian men, and you're noticing there's one word that's always the same in all of that, that, the definition of a gentleman was someone who'd forgotten his Latin. Because if you used your Latin, it meant that you were a preacher or a teacher, and those were jobs. And the idea of somebody who had to work for a living meant you were not aristocratic.
That's right. So, I mean, you talk about how does humor change as you age? You touched on it just to kind of sum up on it.
There's more to make fun of. You have a longer life. You have more experiences. An old person understands what it was like to be young. Young people don't understand what it's like to be old. So again, I'm still teaching. I'm leaving here to go teach my classes at the University of Connecticut, and I have no problem talking to my students as somebody who is 50 years older than they are. I mean, it's not like I'm pretending to be something else. So I say, when you're 50 years older than you are now, this is the difference. So yeah, I have rules that I am happy to set, that I don't negotiate. In my classes, nobody has on an electronic device. There are no phones. There are no laptops. There are no, cell phones on your hand. There are no
smartwatches. And
I mean, if they have an ankle bracelet from their parole officer, they have it removed. If they have a pacemaker, I need a note from their doctor. There is nothing in my class. And I have colleagues who say, my students won't turn off their devices. My students are not allowed in the room if their devices are not in their knapsacks before they enter. And that is non-negotiable. And I teach 2.5-hour classes, and many of my students have not been separated from an electronic device, from using a device for an hour and a half. They get a pee break after an hour and a half. They have not used a device for an hour and a half in their lifetimes.
Mhm.
And I'm glad to be the one that they're scared enough by, or that they respect enough, or that they listen to make that happen when they haven't done it in other places. And I'm funny, but I am strict in terms of what I expect from the class. So you get to be in the class, you play by my rules. That's a privilege of an old person and an experience.
There you go. That's right. And you take them down and give them a few shots if they don't listen.
Not quite that. I don't have a taser either. They took that away from me. No electronic.
Oh, no electronic devices. It's the good old fashioned billy club for you. Gina, gosh, I wish we had more time. You are tremendous. We have your website up on the screen now. Viewers, I implore you to go and check out more from Gina. That is wonderful.